Hello, welcome to Life from Above. My name is David Kenney. Glad you can watch the program with us. I have special guests with me today. I have Mark Bass from the Alki Road congregation. Also, James Kenney, my son, who has attended the Future Preacher Training Camp, which we're going to be talking about. Mark, James, it's great to have you on the program.
Thank you. Good to be here.
A little bit about Mark. Mark is from a family of preachers. Why don't you tell them a little bit about your dad I've met, but your dad's not the only one in your family that preaches, I don't think.
My father preached for many years. My father-in-law is recently retired from preaching. My brother preaches, and two of my brother-in-laws are preachers.
Now, where are you from originally, Mark?
Alabama.
Alabama. What part? That's a pretty good...
South Alabama for about 8 years, and then we moved to North Alabama between Birmingham and Atlanta when I was in junior high.
You went to FreedHardeman College?
Yes.
We talked a little bit about staying in Farrow Hall and what a treat that must have been back in the day to do that. And what was FreedHardeman like back in the days when you attended it?
It was a little smaller then, smaller classes, smaller campus size, and a very small community, which was really nice because I came from a small town, and I would have had a hard time adjusting to a big city, a major university. So it was a small school, small town, very, very good opportunity.
And you married Joanne Canup?
Yes. From
Salisbury, North Carolina. Now, Salisbury, North Carolina. Now, how did you meet Joanne?
We met at FreedHardeman. I went to FreedHardeman to find a wife, and I found a good one.
Yep. Well, that's the same thing with me and Annette. Matter of fact, people, when they find out she's from Alaska, they say, how in the world did you meet your wife? All I have to say is FreedHardeman, and that usually answers the question to most people. Been married to her for 40 years. Matter of fact, I've got a picture of you together here, and married for 40 years?
40 years February.
40 years February. Have 2 children. Tell them a little bit about your children and your grandchildren.
Well, I have a boy and a girl, Bonnie and Michael. 6 grandchildren, ranging from ages 5 to almost 18.
Now, tell them a little bit about the places that you've preached over, since you came from Alabama.
Well, from FreedHardeman, I preached in West Tennessee at Reeves, Tennessee, which is a small town outside of Union City. I preached in Dunmore, Kentucky for a couple of years, and then for the next 9 years I was in Metropolis, Illinois, which is extreme southern Illinois, right on the river across from Paducah, Kentucky. And then we've been in the Grove City area, the Alki Road congregation, for the past 25 years.
You've been preaching for Alki Road. We have a picture of the building there, so and the address there for anybody that might be in the area. They would like to see that. And I know that you've done mission work. Why don't you tell them a little bit about your overseas mission work?
Well, I made about 12 trips into Russia and the Ukraine, all the way from Kiev, Ukraine, all the way up to northern Russia, up above the Arctic Circle. I've made many trips to India. I still teach in the School of Preaching there in North India. And then I've made about 14 trips into Costa Rica for campaigns, taking groups over there to do evangelistic work.
Okay. I know that Alkire Road is the home of a Bible Bowl. You guys still do the Bible Bowl. I see that comes out every year.
Be coming up here in just a few weeks, the last weekend of this month, actually.
Well, that's great. One of the reasons I wanted to have you on the program is talk about another work that Alki Road's been involved in, and that's the Future Preachers Training Camp. And I just want to know if you would tell them a little bit about when the camp is and a little bit about the curriculum and things like that. Well, we'll show them some pictures from the camp.
The camp always begins the Sunday following the 4th of July. Unless the 4th of July is on a Saturday, we bump it forward a week. We've been running this for, actually I think this will be the 19th year. Earlier I said 20, but counting back, I think this is the 19th year that we've had the camp. And the curriculum is just a Bible-based curriculum, and it's not just for young men that want to preach. We tell the young men it will help them to be just a better Christian, a better Bible student, better personal worker, and they learn all kinds of things, how to prepare lessons. They also learn song leading. They have textual studies such as the book of James, overview of the prophets, book of Acts. They also have classes dealing with various issues in the brotherhood and in the world today. A lot of how-to things. They have memory verses they have to learn each day to recite, and everything is conducted there on the property there of the church building. The young men stay in the classrooms. We have shower facilities, and the meals are all there, so it's just a completely in-house program.
Well, I know you have series. We have some pictures of some teachers. that come and teach, and also your wife and others come and help prepare food because they never leave the building.
Right.
And then you also have counselors there on hand that stay at the building just
Right.
to, in case there's an emergency or something comes up or somebody needs some help. And you've had several classes graduate, and we'll show in some pictures here of different years. My son's in some of these pictures, probably all of them, because he's been going for the past 6 years. And then the classroom's really nice, that where you sit and you have teachers come in. Very nice facility. James, why don't you tell them a little bit about your experiences in some of these classes?
Well, when I first started out, I was like, man, these classes are really hard, really extensive. And then when I started later, I realized that they're just more in depth. These classes with some of these experts that come in, they really help you get a greater knowledge of what's in the Bible or things, how to understand the Bible. I'll give an example. Phil Greer, he did this class called Sermon Preparation and Delivery. And I still use his techniques that he taught me when I'm doing my Wednesday night sermons for Wadsworth.
Now, I know that Mark, you bring in some preachers you have opportunity that have some unique experience. Why don't you tell them about some of the special speakers you've been able to have come and present to these students?
Well, we've had, for example, Dave Miller, who is the director of the Apologetics Press down in Montgomery, Alabama. His field of expertise is in Christian apologetics and logic, and an outstanding teacher. He's been with us a couple of times. We bring in various missionaries. Jim Waldron, who has spent the last 40 years doing mission work in the Ukraine, in India, Pakistan, and perhaps some other places I don't know of. He comes in and talks about mission work, some of the experiences he's had and recommendations for young men wanting to do mission work. And of course, we've also had Brother Curtis Cates, now deceased, but he was the director of the Memphis School of Preaching, has come in and taught for us, as well as some other men from various schools of preaching around the Brotherhood.
Now, what is some of the why would you have a future preacher training camp? And what's the goal or the intent of the camp?
Basically, to help prepare these young men for whatever field of service they choose, to pursue in the church. Some of our young men have gone on to preach, gone on to college, gone to preaching school, and we've got several graduates who are now preaching full time. Others have told me in the beginning, I don't want to preach, but I said it doesn't matter. This will help you be a better elder, a better deacon, a better Bible class teacher. Just help you with your knowledge of the Bible. So just trying to ground young men in the Scriptures to prepare them for whatever they choose to pursue in life.
Well, I know my sons really enjoyed it. James, why don't you tell them a little bit about, you mentioned how the studies, they're pretty rigorous, they're pretty in-depth and everything, but it's not just, sitting in a classroom. Tell them about some of the relationships and the friendships you've made with people that attend the camp.
Well, every day we get served 3 meals, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And that's just a great time for all the students to get together and get to know each other. I've made friendships that I'm still close friends with, even though they're all over the country. A friend of mine, Isaac Rice, is currently doing mission work in South America. And I'm friends with Alki Road's intern, Zach Dial. He's probably my closest friend. So it's not just going there, go to the class, and some people might have it like, oh, you got to just study the Bible, it's all boring. No, Bible classes are very interesting, and they give you the opportunity to meet people that you can be friends with for all your life.
Very good. Mark, what would you be looking for in a young man to come and participate in this program?
Well, the only requirement is a desire to learn. We hope it's fun, as James just pointed out, but this is not like a youth camp or a Bible camp where they go and most of the time is spent with sports and games and frolicking. The primary emphasis of this is Bible study, and they do have an hour of free time each evening. They play basketball or various games, but again, as long as they have a desire to learn and they're willing to commit to do the work, we're not as worried about grades as we are about learning.
What additional skills do they learn in class besides obviously the textual stuff and some of the subjects what other skills do they learn or they get out of that class that would help a local congregation?
Well, we have a 6-year curriculum now. It used to be 4. And each of the 6 years, they have a class in song leading. And they have an opportunity to lead songs before an assembly. We also have classes dealing with the home, responsibilities of husbands, fathers in that home relationship, bringing up children in the Lord. Just it's a wide range of what I think of as very practical classes, along with the textual.
I know that they have given students opportunities to actually put some of the things they learned into practice. What kind of things has Alkire Road done outside of just the immediate classroom to help some of these young students be able to put some of these skills into practice?
Well, on Wednesday evening for our midweek service, the young men usually conduct the service. They lead the songs, they conduct the prayers, they give a talk. Sometimes we'll have 2 talks. And then a lot of times on Sunday night, we'll allow 2 of the young men to bring a talk to the congregation. Again, lead the songs and lead the various worship activities.
What's been some of the surprising things that's happened, good or bad? Because you have a group of young men. They're 13 to 18. I'm sure they have been known. You've told us stories about some of the things that have happened. Why don't you share with us some of the stories you don't mind repeating?
Well, we've had broken drywall, broken collarbones, just boys being boys. They one year, some of the young guys were wrestling and just good-hearted, and they were imitating some wrestler's move, and one of them jumped on the other one, and I was on the front bench watching them, and I heard the snap of the bone. So we were at the emergency room for the next 4 or 5 hours, having this shoulder bone readjusted, realigned, and a cast put on the shoulder. And then, would you believe it, the next year we had the same thing happen, except it was outside playing volleyball. One of the boys jumped on the other one, and they both went down, and the one on the bottom suffered a broken collar. Well, his was actually dislocated. And one night they were playing tag in the building, and this actually happened twice, and one of them was running so fast he hit the wall with his hands, and his hand went through the drywall. So, but these are minor. When you get that many boys together for a week, if that's the worst thing to happen, we can repair the drywall.
They always seem to have a good time together. I know that, tell them a little bit about the eldership that you have and their support for this program.
We have 4 elders at Alki Road who are very supportive of this program. When I first suggested it 20 years ago, they were very enthused about it. They have given us full financial backing. There's never been a problem with the money that's spent to buy books for the boys, to buy food, and all the other things that go along with the preacher training camp. But they have been very supportive of it. Allowing these young men to speak, and it's very gratifying when we see one of our young men go through the program, and then he goes on to preaching school or Bible college, and they begin preaching full time. And we have several of our young men that I could name who are currently preaching full time somewhere, some in the mission field, who went through our program. And of course they might have been preachers otherwise, but we feel like we had a little part in helping prepare them.
Well, I imagine you have a young man who's thinking about preaching. You brought this up in the meeting today. We were talking about it, and you and I have talked on the phone about this. But sometimes one of the benefits, even though it's sad, but sometimes people, a young person may think they really want to be a preacher, and then they find out it's not exactly what they thought it was. And you've had some of that too. Why don't you explain that a little bit so people understand what we're talking about?
Well, sometimes you have a young man who's been pushed, maybe his father's a preacher or someone in the family, and you're going to preach. And so they've been pushed into something they really are not sure about. And we've had young men after a couple of years decide, well, I really don't think I want to preach. And we tell them that's fine. What you're learning here is going to help you otherwise. And then we've had young men that insisted from the get-go, I don't want to preach. I'm not going to be a preacher. I'm just here because my family wanted me to come or whatever. And then years later, they say, well, I think I do want to preach. So this is kind of a sounding board for them to find out what preaching is all about, to study at the feet of some really good men who were experienced in preaching and church work, and There's always the opportunity to sit down and talk with your teachers, to discuss preaching with them. So it's a good hands-on opportunity to find out if this is really what they want to do.
Now, you talked about how many years again have you been doing the camp?
This will be our 19th year.
So let me ask you this question, a little different, but on the subject matters, 19 years, the church has a lot of changes going on. What have been some subjects that, on both sides of it, what are some subjects that you don't necessarily, that maybe you didn't have to teach anymore, but some new subjects that you've had to add because of different types of changes for different reasons in the brotherhood?
Well, one of the big issues that we are currently, in fact, it'll be dealt with this year again, is the AD 70 doctrine, sometimes referred to as Max King doctrine. That's one that for a long time, apparently, we thought it was dead. You heard very little out of it, at least not very much out of it. And that's seemingly risen again. So we're trying to prepare them for that issue. And of course, the marriage, divorce, and remarriage issue continues to be problematic, and so we deal with it, and we try to deal with a lot of the current events that preachers are facing in the church. Diminishing numbers, that a lot of congregations are falling off numerically for whatever reason, and this impacts the work of a preacher tremendously. Not only finding work, but finding work that can support a man to do the work of the church.
Now, when you went to FreedHardeman, we had preaching schools back then, I believe. You're not that old.
Yeah.
But the makeup, as far as the students that went to preaching schools when you went to FreedHardeman, they're a lot different than they are today, aren't they? And how are they different?
You got a lot more specialization, if you will. You've got a lot of students today in colleges especially who are wanting to go into youth ministry, and that was somewhat well, there were a few when I was in college, but today there are a lot that are wanting to specialize in youth ministry. There are others wanting to get into ministry counseling and various social aspects of it. So I think there's a broader approach to Bible college and preaching school today.
What about the generational difference as far as the age? It seems back a lot of GIs came back from World War II, and some of them went to preaching schools. They were older gentlemen.
Right.
But that's not necessarily the case now, is it? That's more the exception.
We're seeing more a younger group starting school, which in some ways is good. But on the other hand, there's a little less maturity sometimes when you've got an 18-year-old young man starting school, especially in a preaching school, which is a very intense 4-year curriculum and a 2-year time span. It's a little harder for them to be disciplined than it is for somebody who's just done 3, 4, 5 years in the military. They know what discipline is. So yeah, there's a lot of changes, but also the young people have a lot more energy. In fact, sometimes I get tired just watching these young men with all of their energy and enthusiasm.
Now, what could a preaching school, the way I look at it, it would be good if a preaching school either conducted a future preaching training camp or worked with the congregations that did that. But what could these preaching schools do to help? I mean, young people are enthusiastic and they do have boundless energy, but as well as I do, there are a lot of pitfalls in preaching. You're going to run into some very serious, complex issues in congregations that it's very difficult to prepare someone who's, 20?
Yeah.
21 years old. I mean, who's going to take advice from when people are 40 or 50 years old, they're usually not looking at a young male who's 21 years old for advice.
Right.
So what can preaching schools do to help fortify these men to be able to go out and actually integrate and be effective into the pulpit?
Well, it's difficult, and we do in the preacher training camp try to emphasize the fact that, well, for example, when I was a young preacher, 21 years old, my first work, you talk about marriage or raising children, and I can still remember people with children coming up and saying, yeah, we hear you. Wait till you have children, then you preach that sermon. So I tell them, you're not going to be taken perhaps as seriously on those subjects, but if you preach what the Bible says, you can't use your experiences, you can't give your opinion, but you can give what the Bible says to people, and they can't argue with that. And the years fly by, and now people listen to me because I'm not only a father, I'm a grandfather, and with this much gray, you know, people tend to listen more. But as a young preacher, it's difficult to, as you put it, to be taken seriously because you've not had the life experiences. And back to the first part of your question, a lot of the preaching schools, when we started this in 1999, we were the only place I know that was having a preacher training school or a preacher training camp. And we would have congregations. I had congregations from North Carolina, from Texas, and other places ask for our curriculum and our program, which we gladly shared. And now I look around the Brotherhood, and there are between 20 and 25 of these. A lot of the schools of preaching, at least 4 of the preaching schools, now have their own in-house preaching camp. There are preacher training camps all over the country at this point, which is great. You know, we're glad to see, you know, we're not in competition with anybody, but 20 years ago, we had young men coming in from Arkansas, from Missouri, flying in. We had young men from Alabama, South Carolina, Mississippi. And we don't get that as much now because a lot of these places, they can go closer to home, which is great.
Well, I know that the enrollment in the school has been very well attended in the sense of, I'm not sure how many. It seems like one year that was close to the highest number of students, but you still have had years in the past you had more students, it seems like, but you have a real good retention rate.
Yeah. The highest we've had is, I think, 21 or 22 students, and probably the low was 6, and the average would probably be 12 to 14 overall. And we do have a good retention rate. We've had 1 or 2 that after the first year said, this is not for me, which is fine. But most of the boys after the first year, you know, they can't wait to come back. And that's why we went from a 4 to a 6-year curriculum, because a lot of boys were going 4 years and saying, can I come back? You know, even though they knew they'd be repeating the same first-year classes. So we've expanded the curriculum to a 6-year program to accommodate those that want to come longer.
Now, James, this will be how many years?
I think this will be my 6th year.
His 6th year. Any regrets?
Absolutely none.
And you would take time out of July summer vacation, and you would still say it's not like we took you out of regular school.
Yeah.
And you would find it worthwhile.
Yeah. Even though the course is tremendously difficult and it's a lot of work with the memory verses and getting the opportunity to do it, I would still do it. It's just a great experience. It's a lot of fun. I love the people. I love the church there. It's just a lot of fun.
And I know Joanne Bass. She makes sure you're fed well.
They've complained about some classes, but nobody's ever complained about the food.
What, Mark, you know, you've done a lot of work for the church. What kind of preachers in your past have really just had a lot of influence in your life to sort of direct? I mean, people can go in and they can do whatever. You know, some people, they wouldn't do all that work. They would sit back and, you know, I mean, I wouldn't say they'd sit back and do nothing, but they wouldn't be have so much initiative to try to do that. What are some preachers that have sort of motivated you or inspired you to do this kind of thing?
Well, first and foremost, my father, Herschel Bass, was a big encouragement from the get-go, from even as a youngster. He encouraged me to preach, and once I started to encourage him, he was my biggest encourager, but he was also my biggest critic, in the sense that he would always say, well, you did good, but you can do better. And so he constantly pushed me to do more, not become contented. And a lot of other preachers that, growing up in a preacher's family, I grew up around men like Foy Wallace, Gus Nichols, Jim Boyd, just a lot of good men. Brother Robert R. Taylor was a big encouragement to me, Brother Garland Elkins, and Curtis Cates, and just a host of others that I looked at and I thought, hey, I want to be like these men. I want to do the things that they're doing. And so they were a big encouragement, even though they probably didn't intend it that way. It was an encouragement to me.
So if there's a young man out there who's interested in considering coming to training camp, preacher training camp, what would they need to do?
Contact us, and we'd be glad to send an application to them, and I assume the address is being shown on the screen there, but they can call or write, and we'll be glad to send them an application and answer any questions they have.
And that would be the Alkire Road Church of Christ.
Right.
Well, Mark, thank you very much for being on the program.
Thank you for having me. We've enjoyed it.
That's all the time we have for today. Thanks for watching our program. Please tune in again. Before we close our program today, we'd like to take a moment and review this roadmap to heaven with you, since the matter is so serious. There are many incorrect set of directions out there, and sadly so many people are following them. For example, some people have been given wrong turns. They believe things such as faith only, works only, or grace only. Or some attempt to change the order of the turns, being baptized before they even believe. Some people fail to realize what point they are on the map. Don't even open their Bibles yet, and they think they're saved already. As a person travels in a car or takes a hike, it has to follow the proper directions, so we must follow the proper directions to heaven. Let's take a look at the directions on our roadmap to heaven here. You have to look at these passages in your Bible for yourself. We'll just list the steps, the turns on the way. First is to believe or to have faith. And then number 2, to repent, to turn away from sin. Number 3 is to confess that Jesus is the Son of God. Number 4 is immersion, or to be baptized, which is a burial in water to have your sins washed away. And then you're added to the church by the Lord, not by a group of people, or not by giving some kind of testimonial experience or things like that. And then once you're added, you need to serve and worship the Lord faithfully all the days of your life. And the key word's faithfully. You don't waver. And that's very important. We need to keep in mind, too, that in Noah's day there was a big flood, and only people in the ark were saved from the flood. The same is true today. There is no salvation outside the Lord's church. Where are you on the roadmap to heaven? Thanks for watching our program. Please let us know if we can assist you with further information for your journey.